Number 5 on this list is the Treatise of the Vessels. The year is 1981. Harrison Ford has already taken the big screen a few times, but is he a leading actor? Yes, Raiders of the Lost Ark takes to the screen, and the beautiful George Lucas and Steven Spielberg brainchild officially solidifies Harrison Ford as being an elite A-lister in Hollywood. Well, this beautiful brainchild of theirs didn't just come out of thin air, but it was very likely inspired by the Treatise of the Vessels. This text is said to talk about some priceless treasures from King Solomon along with the Ark of the Covenant. If found, these would be some of the most valuable things ever rediscovered in all of human history. When there's gold, people are going to come, and the same thing applies here. There are riches galore to be found if someone is able to get to the bottom of this mystery, and the secrets may be within the Treatise of the Vessels. The thing is, it doesn't tell you the exact location of the Ark, so our daring explorers will need to find out for themselves. In case you didn't know, the Ark of the Covenant is said to hold tablets containing the 10 Commandments. The rest of the treasure is described in the treatise as being 77 tables of gold, and their gold was from the walls of the Garden of Eden that was revealed to Solomon, and they radiated like the radiance of the sun and moon, which radiate at the height of the world. So yeah, it's all pretty freaking good stuff. Although, I don't know if y'all remember the end of Harrison Ford's massive breakout movie, but discovering the Ark of the Covenant may not be the best thing ever. In fact, it's said that touching the Ark of the Covenant will result in death by the hands of God. That's why some people think this whole thing is cursed. Yes, if you actually found this thing, then you might be the most wealthy person in the world, but it may also kill you in the process. You also may never find it at all and dedicate your life to nothing. I'd say that you can probably read this thing, just leave the exploring to our main man Indy. Number 4 on this list is the Voynich manuscript. The Voynich manuscript is definitely an interesting one, largely because no one has any idea what it's saying. This is a 250-page book where pretty much all of the words are in an unfamiliar language that we can't seem to decipher. The reason that people think this thing is inherently cursed isn't just because of the gibberish though, it's because of the pictures that go along with said gibberish. Cosmological symbols, weird plants doing weird things, and nude women doing some other weird things are all over this book. It should also be stated that the manner of the drawings are just plain creepy. Like, there's nothing inherently evil or cursed about a plant or a naked woman, but the way that the book has drawn them out really does give me some serious devil vibes. Because of this, people worry that the book may be cursed. That potentially this is a book from the underworld which somehow made its way to our world. This is why we can't understand the words, but a demon would be able to pick it up no problem. Experts have researched the language, and although they don't know what it is, have discovered some hallmarks that indicate it is a real language of some kind. Therefore, it could be some kind of demonic tongue that we aren't familiar with. Granted, it could also be some other ancient language that's just been lost in time. Demonic language or ancient language, I think based on the drawings, it's clear that whatever is said is probably not PG stuff. Who knows how many gruesome or questionable things this book has been part of in its lifetime. Considering you wouldn't be able to read it anyways, I'd just avoid it altogether. Number 3 on this list is the Handbook of Ritual Power. Anything called the Handbook of Ritual Power probably deserves to be on the list. Owen Jarvis details this book nicely by writing, "This 20-page codex dates back around 1,300 years and is written in Coptic. It contains a variety of magical spells and formulas including love spells, spells for curing black jaundice, and instructions on how to perform an exorcism. The text may have been written by a group of Sethians, an ancient Christian sect who held Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve, in high regard." The opening of the text references a mysterious figure named Bactiotha, whose identity is unknown. "I give thanks to you, and I call upon you, the Bactiotha, the Great One who is very untrustworthy, the one who is Lord over the 40 and the 9 kinds of serpents," a translation of the text reads. The researchers who translated and analyzed the text call it a Handbook of Ritual Power. It is now housed at the Museum of Ancient Cultures at Macquarie University in Sydney. The university purchased the codex in 1981 from a Vienna-based antiquities dealer named Michael Fackelman. Where Fackelman got it from is unknown. Spells, formulas, black jaundice, all of this sounds quite a lot like some of the other books that we've looked at in the first two parts of this series. A book that probably teaches humans some skills that we simply aren't ready to receive. A book that, if it fell into the wrong hands, somebody with evil intentions, could prove to be really bad. There are things that need to be left in the hands of higher beings, and making somebody fall in love with someone else may just be one of them. Keep this book locked up and away from prying eyes. Number 2 on this list is the Dresden Codex. Owen Jarvis details once again the Dresden Codex beautifully by writing, "The Dresden Codex is a Mayan text dating back around 800 years. It contains 39 beautifully illustrated sheets with texts and images on both sides. Research published in 2016 in the Journal of Astronomy and Culture indicates that the Codex records the phases of the planet Venus so that the Maya would be certain that their ceremonial events were being held on the correct day. The Maya had a really elaborate ritual set of events that were tied to the calendar," study researcher Geraldo Aldana, a science historian at the University of California, Santa Barbara, told Live Science. They were probably doing large-scale ritual activities connected to the different phases of Venus. Now, for those who don't know, Venus, albeit a very beautiful planet, is often tied to Lucifer. It should also be noted that the Mayans were known to perform the occasional human sacrifice, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that this text most likely contains dates when human sacrifices are to be performed. The Dresden Codex would have acted as an agenda to make sure that our Mayans kept on track with their sacrificial rituals to honor Venus. For this reason, it's thought that this codex is cursed with the souls of those who were sacrificed. It's also very dangerous to perform any of these rituals, as they will likely involve the loss of human life and potentially reaching out to some very dangerous gods. This is the oldest surviving Maya book, and for that reason needs to be kept around for research, but I wouldn't recommend the average person giving it a read. And finally, number 1 on this list is Liber Lineatus. This text is currently considered to be the longest lasting Etruscan text in all of history. It dates back to the 3rd century BCE, and because not much is known about the Etruscan language, it remains mostly untranslated. However, experts who study such things have been able to decipher some of it and have discovered that the text was a ritual calendar, a collection of dates with specific rituals to be performed on said dates. The exact details of these rituals are unknown, but we assume them to be centered around human sacrifices and things of that nature. This is already enough to fear this book, but what makes it inherently cursed is how the pages were used for several thousand years. Mihailo Beric was a low-ranking Croatian official who, in 1848, decided to leave his position and travel to Egypt. While he was there, he decided to purchase a sarcophagus with a mummy inside. Why someone would want a coffin with a preserved dead body in it is beyond me, but apparently this was pretty cool to own back then. Anyways, he takes this mummy back to his home in Vienna and stands it upright in the corner of one of his rooms. It wasn't until after he died though and his brother donated the mummy to the State Institute of Croatia that somebody realized what the mummy was covered with. The bandages that preserved the mummy were covered in writing. These bandages were the Liber Lineatus and had been used as rags for this mummy for centuries. Now this text is locked in a refrigerated room in the Archaeological Museum of Croatia, and for good reason. Not only is the writing of this text potentially very dangerous, but people believe that the spirit of this dead mummy haunts the rags and that they're cursed. Those that come into contact with them, or God forbid, read them, could have some very tragic events befall them. For this reason, I highly recommend staying away from the Liber Lineatus at all costs.
Coming at number 5, we've got the Golden Eagle. With a name like that, you'd assume it's just some dad's wicked old muscle car. Not quite though. It's a 1964 Dodge 330 and it's gone through the hands of many people. The transfer from owner to owner is rarely peaceful though. This car is known for its tendency to kill people. And we're not just talking about unfortunate accidents and collisions, it caused death to all those who owned it, usually in very odd and violent ways. Originally, it was a police cruiser. Patrolmen and the like would bring it out for their daily activities. The first person assigned to the car was killed relatively quickly. Then 2 more officers got a chance at driving it and they were killed as well. The weird thing is, all the deaths were gruesome murder-suicides. Not a great start for this vehicle, eh? Well, after seeing it happen thrice, the folks at the police station had seen enough. They took the car off the force and sold it off to a young family. Interestingly, the family didn't seem to have any issues with this cursed car, but that didn't stop it from killing. Oh no, it refrained from ending the lives of its drivers at the time, but when neighbors learned about its history, they took up arms. During the night, many would attempt to vandalize the car, but it would not be stopped. Many who attempted to damage the vehicle ended up perishing in unexplained ways. There was nothing to directly connect these things to the car, but those who did mess with it often got messed up. Eventually, it was decided that enough was enough and the car was brought to the impound lot. This led to it being chopped up into pieces, and somehow, this still wasn't the end. The car still rides in some capacity. A lot of the parts stripped from the impounded Gold Eagle were used to build another car. At this point, we're entering Ship of Theseus territory, and we have to decide whether or not that means that the Gold Eagle still is rolling around or if it's a whole new thing. After a supposed 14 deaths, it's probably for the best that the original car is retired. Nobody's reported any new incidents related to it, but who knows? All in due time. Coming in number 4, we've got James Dean's Porsche 550 Spyder. A classic tale like no other, many think that Dean's unfortunate passing was a result of reckless driving. And if the story had stopped there, that's probably what it would have been chalked up to. However, the two-seater that would become famously known as Little Bastard made sure to cause plenty of trouble in the years following the original accident. Our story starts with James Dean, legendary actor and racing enthusiast. Considering a career in motorsport to go along with his acting, he entered many races and did quite well. After being barred from racing during the filming of one of his movies, he wanted to get back out there as soon as possible. Trading in his speedster for the now infamous 1955 Porsche 550 Spyder, he was ready to roll. Wanting to break the car in before racing it, he decided to drive it all the way from LA to Salinas. During this trip, he crashed into a turning vehicle, flipping the Spyder and sending his passenger flying. Dean remained inside the car, tumbling about, and was killed almost instantly. The car was totaled, but there were bits that could be saved. The engine and drivetrain were salvaged and sold to a duo of doctors who were into similar races. After integrating these parts into their own cars, the doctors entered a race and both crashed. One of the two actually died as a result of their accident. At this point, the car was going to be made an example of. While in storage, waiting to be used as warning for student drivers, the garage it was kept in burned down. Then, in a comedy of errors, the car was brought to multiple different schools and caused problems at each one. First, it fell off the truck that was carrying it. Then it tipped over and broke a student's hip. And finally, some thieves tried to steal the blood-stained seats and steering wheel only to sustain injuries in the attempt. Then, and this is the really crazy bit, the car straight up disappeared, just like that. Couldn't even drive it if you wanted to. But I'll bet if it ever does show up again, the next person to try and drive it will end up much worse off than they'd be if they didn't. Coming in number 3, we've got a ghost crash. While the car itself might not be cursed, there's definitely some haunting going on here. Back in the early 2000s, police discovered a car that had crashed about 5 months earlier. Inside were the remains of a decomposing body killed by the car veering off the road and crashing into the woods. That doesn't sound too odd, right? A crash happened, nobody was around to see it, and the cops found the results months down the line. But here's the weird part. People kept calling in and reporting headlights swerving off the road right at that very location. Every time the cops went out to see though, they found no evidence of an accident. Eventually, after plenty of what they assumed were prank calls, they did an in-depth search of the area, finally coming across the wreckage. Some say that the spirit of the man inside the car was trying to lead people to his location so he could be discovered and put to rest. The car in question was a Vauxhall Astra, so if you're ever in or around one, just keep an eye out for spirits. Coming in number 2, we've got John F. Kennedy's limo. Any car involved with a death will generate some rumors about curses. However, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and guess that the number of deaths in cars caused by accidents and collisions outnumber those caused by assassination. Just maybe, right? This Lincoln 74A convertible was meant to be the ultimate in presidential locomotion. For whatever reason though, it was never made bulletproof. Plenty of other upgrades were added to it, but never one meant to stop bullets. Well, we all know how that played out in the end. After Kennedy's death, the limo was still used as a presidential vehicle for almost a decade, albeit with some major changes in look and feel. It was phased out over time and ended up in a museum, but to this day people claim to see shadowy figures hanging out near it. The most common claim is that a figure dressed in gray can be seen standing next to the car. Usually this apparition appears in November, but it has been spotted during other months. And finally at number 1, Archduke Franz Ferdinand's Graf and Stift double phaeton. That is a mouthful. and a wildly important vehicle when you consider the course of world history. Many blame this car for the beginning of World War I, although that might be a bit of a stretch. See, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife had narrowly avoided being assassinated by Bosnian hitmen. Being the classy statespeople they were, they decided to go to the hospital and visit those who had been injured in the attempt on their lives. Their car stalled out in front of a cafe where one of the assassins had stopped to get a drink. Seeing the Archduke in a motionless car, right there, he took the opportunity and gunned him down. This was the tipping point that pushed nations into the First World War. So if you firmly believe in concrete cause and effect, you can probably blame all the deaths in that war on this one vehicle. Gnarly. From there, it would change hands about 14 more times, claiming over a dozen lives in assorted accidents and mechanical failures. So even when it works, and even when it's not in the hands of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, this car is cursed.
Number 5 on this list is King Tut's mask. The curse of King Tut is one of the most famous curses to surround a tomb ever. King Tut was a pharaoh in ancient Egypt who boasted one of the most ornate tombs in history. This tomb carried a curse though, and those who entered it suffered fatal consequences. On the pyramids of Giza, there's a very specific curse written on the entrance. It reads, "All people who enter this tomb who will make evil against this tomb and destroy it, may the crocodile be against them in the water and snakes against them on land. May the hippopotamus be against them in water, the scorpion on land." This curse stuck with those who entered. It all started with Howard Carter, the leader of the team, whose canary was eaten by a cobra the second that they first entered the tomb. Then the person who financed the whole excavation died shortly afterwards. And from there, a domino effect occurred where many others involved suffered horrible tragedies or passed away. Some speculate though that it wasn't actually the act of opening the tomb that sparked this curse, but it was what they did with King Tut's mask. King Tut had a burial mask on when he was mummified and put in his tomb. The mask is beautiful. It's meant to resemble the person it's on so that the gods can recognize him and bring him up to heaven. Inside the mask is a bunch of oils and materials that are said to help preserve the body. All of this is all well and good, but on the back of the mask is an inscription. This inscription is said to be a curse similar to the one on the pyramids of Giza. Well, if that wasn't enough, then there's a rumor this mask was broken during the excavation process and had to be reassembled when they took it back to their headquarters. Opening the tomb is already problematic, but to then break the mask of King Tut that has a curse inscribed on it, that's just asking for trouble. Number 4 on this list is King Casimir IV's coffin. King Casimir was born in 1427 into royalty. By 1440, when he would have only been 13, Casimir was named the Grand Duke of Lithuania, and only 7 years later in 1447 became the fully fledged King of Poland. He stood as the King of Poland right up until the day he died. Oftentimes, kings don't make it right up until their death, but King Casimir's success was pretty historic. He's known in Polish history as being one of the most politically active and prosperous kings to ever rule over their country. During his reign, he won several wars, recovered territories for Poland, and made their royal family one of the leaders in Europe. Due to all of the glory that he received in his life, it was only fitting that he have a tomb that reflected this. He died when he was 65 years old in 1492 and was put to rest in the chapel of Wawel Castle. There he lay for roughly 500 years until 1973. Researchers opened the tomb to find a horrible surprise. The researchers opened this tomb and investigated the mummification process and all the artifacts he was buried with. They took his body and coffin out of this place and brought it back to their lab. What they didn't realize though was that this coffin had a curse to it. It's estimated that over 15 people died who worked on researching this body and this coffin. It took a while before they realized what was causing this death, but eventually they discovered the error of their ways. You see, the coffin was cursed, but it wasn't cursed with anything ghostly, it was cursed with Aspergillus flavus. Cursed is also a misleading word to use in this instance as well, because Aspergillus flavus is actually a pathogenic fungus. A fungus that when exposed to people can become a killer. For a long time, people thought that there truly was an ancient curse surrounding this coffin, but it was actually this fungus that kept preying on people's immune systems. Eventually, King Casimir's body was taken and put back into his tomb, but not before the damage had been done and over 15 people had lost their lives. Number 3 on this list is the screaming skull of Burton Agnes Hall. The screaming skull of Burton Agnes Hall wasn't necessarily from a tomb, but it was recovered from a grave, so I think it still counts in this criteria. Burton Agnes Hall was built in the 17th century in Yorkshire. It was built by Sir Henry Griffith, who had 3 daughters he loved very much. They all moved there and were very happy for a time. One of the daughters was named Anne, and Anne loved to explore the outdoors. One day though, when she was exploring, a gang of robbers got to her and they beat her and left her for dead. When the family found her, there was barely any life left in her. They brought her back to their home, but her time on this world wasn't long. While she was dying, she had a very strange request to her 2 remaining sisters. She begged them to take her head and put it within the walls of the hall so that she could always be there with her family. She was dying, so they agreed, but neither of them actually intended on taking their sister's head off and keeping it in their home. A few days later, she died, and they buried her outside the hall without keeping their promise. This was a big mistake though. After she was buried, strange noises and banging sounds started happening all over the hall. Screams and crying could be heard throughout, and moans the family couldn't ignore. Eventually they gave in, dug Anne up, and took off her head. They brought it into the hall and the disturbances, they stopped. But years passed and the ownership of this hall changed. The new owners, they had no interest in a dead girl's skull in their home and got rid of it, but sure enough, just when they did, the noises and the hauntings started again. Over the centuries, people have tried and tried again to rid themselves of this skull many times, but eventually they always cave and they have to bring it back in. The skull truly is cursed, and it must remain inside the home at all times if you ever want any peace from Anne's spirit. Number 2 on this list is King Tut's statuettes. King Tut's tomb didn't just have one cursed item, it had multiple. His burial mask is pretty widely known, but many don't know the story of 2 statuettes that also came from this tomb. These were 2 small bronze statues found inside the tomb. One of them with their hand over their heart and the other one with their hand over their mouth. Lord Carnarvon, the man who funded the initial excavation, gave these to a friend as a gift. This was meant to be in good faith and a friendly gesture, but he had no idea the trouble that they would cause. The name of the family is omitted in this story to protect their integrity, and the person who received the statues is simply referred to as James. James received these statues and brought them back to America with him, but then started to suffer the consequences. Once wildly successful, James started to lose everything: his company, his money, his family. James went through 3 failed marriages, a complete collapse of his immense fortune, and finally died of illness without ever realizing these statues were part of the problem. He left them to his grandson in his will, and the curse continued. When his grandson took hold of these statues, he was a decorated Olympian, but he also suffered a serious fall from grace. Injuries, other accidents, and failed business ventures plagued the grandson from the second that he took hold of these statues until finally he called the museum. He donated them to the museum so that they could be put with some of the other King Tut pieces and the curse could finally be lifted from his family. Now, it's certainly possible that this was all a coincidence and this family just got down on their luck at the wrong time, but anything involving King Tut has the potential to be cursed, and I wouldn't be surprised if these statues were part of that. Number 1 on this list is the Unlucky Mummy. The Unlucky Mummy is an ornate wooden coffin that was found in an ancient Egyptian tomb. This coffin's preservation was remarkable for how old experts thought that it must be. The coffin was said to hold the remains of ancient Egyptian princess Amun-Ra. The legend says that in 1890 some British men stumbled upon this casket at an Egyptian excavation site. There were 4 men and they all suffered greatly right after coming in contact with this coffin. The first man, who initially took ownership of the coffin, was seen leaving his hotel and walking straight into the desert to never be seen again, only after 1 day of possessing said casket. The second man, on the very next day, was accidentally shot and had to have his arm amputated. The third man, when they did eventually get back to Britain, returned to see that all of his life savings were gone. And the last man died from disease shortly after the discovery of this artifact. And just like that, the curse of the Unlucky Mummy began. Now, there are some misconceptions with this mummy. Some people believe that the Unlucky Mummy got put onto the Titanic ship and that's what caused the Titanic to sink. That was never the case though. In fact, once the coffin got to Britain, it's never left. That doesn't mean that this thing isn't still cursed though. It currently resides at the British Museum in London. Since its arrival there, other rumors about this ancient artifact have come out, such as the untimely death of writer Bertram Fletcher Robinson. He was convinced that there was no curse surrounding this coffin. In fact, he even wrote extensively on that topic, but then he died shortly afterwards. Incidents like this have happened all throughout history, further solidifying the curse around this coffin. With everything that's happened to it, the term unlucky might just be a bit of an understatement.
Number 5. The family jewels. Some things get passed on generation to generation. Some are begged, some are borrowed, and some are stolen. Our first cursed item has made its way across so many seas at the price of many lives. At a whopping 186 carats, the Koh-i-Noor diamond may look precious beyond all belief, but this cursed gemstone has a much darker, unbelievable side too. The name derives from the Persian Hindi words mountain of light. Many theories exist as to its original owner and who was originally cut for. A Hindu description of the diamond warns that, quote, "He who owns this diamond will own the world, but will also know all of its misfortunes. Only God or women can wear it with impunity." Well, that's jarring, to say the least. Right there in writing, huh? Yeah. It passed between the hands of various rulers, blood-soaked era after another, a king who blinded his own son, and a ruler whose head had become encrusted with liquid molten gold was paid for this price. Legend has it that the stone's origins of causing death and misfortune to any male who owns or wears it stems from brothers murdering each other to even sons murdering their fathers over it. But does it actually carry a curse affecting men who wear it? First owned by the emperors of the Mughal Empire in India, it was taken and added with the Timur ruby to make an armband for ruler of the Peacock Empire. The diamond then went to Sikh Maharaja Ranjit Singh. After his death, his 5-year-old son Duleep Singh, the last Maharaja of the Sikh Empire, would be the last male who ever seemed to wear it. Since being owned by the British royal family, and oddly enough, it's only ever been worn by females. After Queen Victoria's death, Queen Alexandra got it and was used to crown her at her coronation in 1902. The diamond was then transferred to Queen Mary's crown in 1911 and finally to the Queen Mother's crown in 1937, where it remained for more than 80 years. When Queen Elizabeth died in 2002, the crown was placed on top of her casket for the funeral. All of the crowns are now on display in the Jewel House at the Tower of London, with crystal replicas of the diamonds set in the older models they were in. So what's the deal? Is this thing still cursed? Did the royal family know something that we didn't? Maybe. Number 4. The statues of Lemb. The Women of Lemb statue was discovered in Lemb, Cyprus in 1878 and dates back to about 3500 BCE. The statue eventually earned the nickname the Goddess of Death after 4 different families experienced tragedy while handling and owning the carved stones. The first owner, Lord Elfont, along with his entire family, perished within 6 years of owning the statue, all from mysterious and rapid illnesses. The other 2 owners, Ivor Minucci and Lord Thompson Noel, also died along with their entire families just a few short years after obtaining the statue within their homes. The 4th owner, Sir Alan Beaverbrook, died alongside his wife and 2 daughters of mysterious causes while in possession of the carved rock. Although his sons did not believe in the curse attached to the statue, out of fear of the sudden misfortunes around them, they decided to gift the Royal Scottish Museum in Edinburgh the find, where it is now encased in glass, safe, unable to bear any other family bad news. You gotta think, someone was just like sitting there back then chiseling this rock like 6,000 years ago. What were they thinking? What were they saying out loud? What were they looking at? Why did they seem to have blessed this rock with so much evil and misfortune? You tell me. Number 3, the mummy. Not actually a mummy, but the mummy board, or coffin, or lid. The board is painted of an unknown high-status woman from the 21st or 22nd dynasty. Timescale for you, that's about 1,000 years BCE. The British Museum's unlucky mummy has earned quite the reputation for causing destruction through its ancient curse. The mummy was found at Thebes in Greece in the late 1800s, and tales of its curse started soon after its discovery. It's said that of the 4 young Englishmen who bought it, 2 died in a shooting accident and 2 died of health problems. A string of illnesses, accidents, and deaths following this are said to be attributed to the lid. One of the most infamous rumors about the mummy's curse is that it caused the sinking of the Titanic. Wait a minute, what? One of the victims on board was a journalist who apparently was the first to publish articles about the mummy's find and the curse that went with it. Survivors from the disaster recall hearing stories about the ship of an ominous artifact that has a sinister reputation. As the mummy stories and the rumors spread, people who survived began to ask the question if the rumors had caused the disaster that night. The unlucky mummy is now an ancient Egyptian artifact in the collection of the British Museum in London. The identity of the original owner is still being studied and the related causes brought on by it. Due to the brief hieroglyphic inscriptions of short religious phrases, scientists are still trying to decipher decipher the name and the curse that comes along with it, and the actual location of where the body disappeared to. It's been feared since the discovery in the late 1880s, and the mummy's lid has acquired a reputation credited with causing death, injury, and large-scale disasters, earning the nickname the Unlucky Mummy. None of these stories have any basis in fact, of course, but the mummy serves as a spiritual question mark and remains a mystery to scientists who crack the code open. Yo, where's Brendan Fraser when you need him, right? He can figure this whole thing out. Number 2, the haunted bed. Apparently there's a bed that makes you more dizzy and have more sinister evil visions than that of a night on a waterbed. Yeah, I've had a couple hungover nights lost at sea, let me tell you. Gets pretty choppy out there. Highly don't recommend it. But this bed, I also highly don't recommend. The lavishly ornate great bed of ware does not like you sleeping in it. The hardwood oak bed is richly decorated and carved with figures and scenes you could daydream for, well, days over. It's so large that it's rumored to comfortably sleep 4 couples. Yeah. Talk about a California king. There's a tale that suggests that the bed was made in the 15th century for King Edward IV by a very gifted carpenter, but through the years found itself being passed between the inns of ware where commoners were able to sleep in it, break the legs, and apparently cover it head to toe in graffiti. Yeah, the disrespect alone. The defacing got so bad that apparently the ghost of the maker haunts those who are not of royal blood. Basically not blessed by God to rule. It's so old and so haunted that apparently people who spend the night are woken up violently by specters watching them sleep. Apparently there are so many initials carved into the wood, images drawn on it, that it's hard to know who actually the bed was originally fitted for, and who actually cursed it. Some researchers believe that the curse surrounding the bed could have actually been carved into it with symbols and text that hexed the next user. Whatever its history, it's haunted. The bed can now be found in the British galleries of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. We need like the Long Island medium to take a nap in it, you know what I mean? See what she thinks. And coming in at the number 1 spot, the Terracotta Army. The Terracotta Army was discovered in 1974 by a group of farmers. Yang Zifa, his 5 brothers, and neighbor were digging a well east of the Qin Emperor's tomb mound at Mount Li. For centuries, occasional reports mentioned pieces of terracotta figures and fragments of the Qin necropolis. Roofing tiles, bricks, and masonry were regularly found. But when they discovered heads, Chinese archaeologists started to investigate. To this day, it remains the largest pottery figurine group ever found. The Terracotta Army seemed to be a collection of terracotta sculptures depicting the armies of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. It is a form of funerary art buried with the emperor around 209 BCE with the purpose of protecting the emperor in the afterlife. The figures were discovered in Lingtong County outside Shaanxi, China. The figures vary in height according to their rules, and they're all dressed in different garbs. The tallest, of course, being the generals. These statues include warriors, chariots equipped with horses, more than 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, 520 horses, and 150 cavalry. Other terracotta non-military figures were found in pits close by, including officials, acrobats, strongmen, and musicians. Yo, are we sure that Medusa didn't just like make her way through China and start stoning people in time with her looks? Because that's like an entire city made out of clay. In the records of the Grand Historian, China's 24 dynastic histories, it was written that work on the mausoleum began in 246 BCE, soon after Emperor Qin ascended the throne. Apparently the project involved 700,000 workers. Yeah, I'd really hope so, because that many perfectly sculpted figures are so realistic, there must have been a city of artists. The site is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site and has been since 1987. This is scary just looking at it. I'm not convinced this was just an art project for the journey between spirit realms. I think this was used as a decoy for battle. 20,000 figurines just chillin' waiting seems pretty intimidating to me. Whatever its origins, it's jarring to look at. What do you think?
Number 5 on this list is the smelly photo. Alright everybody, beware of the smelly photo, for if you purchase it, then you'll be cursed with a horrible smelling odor for all of eternity. Alright, so maybe it's not that dramatic, but apparently this is actually a thing. Mental Floss says this historic daggerette type is reportedly inhabited by a Victorian gent named Martin. It was initially found in the eaves of an attic, and its owner would bring it out for guests to see. Eventually people began to notice that certain smells would mysteriously appear and just as mysteriously disappear, such as the scent of roses and cigar or pipe smoke, or even the odor of smoke from a wood fire, the seller writes. When questioned with a Ouija board, the spirit inside was sometimes talkative and even playful, but other times reticent. But some spooky things started happening in the house, like objects disappearing or being moved, and footsteps and whispers faintly heard. These strange goings on became more frequent until finally the image was removed from the house and sent to a collector who reports some continued activity. So I'm unsure if you can still buy this thing or if it's completely off the market for good, but realistically, you probably shouldn't want to be buying it anyways. Your house basically becomes immediately haunted with weird smells if you purchase this photo. Now I will admit, some of these smells really aren't that bad, like roses. If this picture can just make my house smell like roses all the time, then I mean, that sounds pretty nice. Or honestly, cigar smoke can be really nice too. Like, there's definitely a time and place to have a good whiff of a cigar, but the big problem is that you can't really control this thing. So if my guy wanted to just scent the house up with the odor of unwashed 1800s Victorian era man, then he could totally do that. This item isn't gonna kill you or anything, but I do think that the novelty would wear off pretty fast and it could get annoying very quickly. Just make sure that you have some Febreze on hand if you do choose to buy it. Number 4 on this list is the haunted donkey. So this one could be very good or very bad depending on the person who purchases it. Mental Floss says this small decorative juice container has a surprisingly spooky backstory. According to the owner, it spontaneously fills up with water. The inherited piece has been exhibiting the odd behavior for years since the owner was a child. At first, they suspected that their grandmother, who owned the item at the time, was filling it with water, but once she died, they discovered that there was something else at play. One night, the seller knocked against the jug by accident and noticed it sounded like it had liquid in it. When I investigated, I found that there was indeed water in it, they wrote. I thought maybe it was a mistake, they explained, but it's happened sporadically ever since. I'm not scared or anything, but I'm just not into the type of stuff. I wish my Nana well in the afterlife, but it's just not for me, they said. Now, one thing that isn't mentioned there is what happens if you drink the water. Apparently, if you have a good heart and are kind and caring and look out for your fellow human, then drinking this water is fine, and it's believed to even give you good luck. But if you don't possess those qualities that I just listed, if you're rude, if you're selfish, and if you're greedy, if you only look out for yourself and will walk over other individuals for your own personal gain, then drinking this water will do the opposite. You will be cursed with bad luck, and it will be very hard to get rid of it. So that's what I mean. This item can be very polarizing and can be super good depending on who buys it, or it could be super bad. Number 3 on this list is the Tai Jin mask. We have another cursed item from eBay here that can certainly have its benefits, but also have its drawbacks as well, if you aren't careful with it. Mental Floss says the person selling this mask claims that they personally witnessed a witch in Thailand capture a jinn, or genie, in it. Among the mask's alleged talents are the ability to bring the owner riches and the ability to keep vampires away. Both are useful skills, but they come with a price. You must make offerings of food and drink to keep the jinn happy. Not to mention the fact that for the first month you have to meditate on his name 3 times a day for 20 minutes each. So here's my thing. Riches and the ability to ward off vampires, that sounds cool, I like it. I mean, who wouldn't want to have a magical mask that can make you rich? That'd be awesome. Granted, there is that whole other thing too. This is a jinn, and even though that's really cool, I don't want to fall into a trap of fully trusting this thing. Genies are very tricky. They say one thing, you take it at face value, but they mean something else entirely. So this thing might say something and make you believe that you're getting rich, and then totally flip the script on you and have it mean something else. Also, let's not forget that if you mess up a little bit and don't offer this thing food or water or meditate on it 3 times a day, then it will probably choose to respond decently badly to you. These are all risks that I personally don't think I'm willing to take. Also, here's my other thing. Like, if this mask is gonna give you tons of riches, then why is somebody selling it on eBay? Why would you need to sell this thing if you're already super rich based on the mask? And if it was that great, then wouldn't you want to keep it? I don't know, just some stuff to consider before you pull the trigger on this thing. Number 2 on this list is Lisa's shoes. Lisa was a young girl who lived back in the Victorian era a long time ago. Now apparently she died way too soon. We think it was sepsis, but we don't really know when she died or why she died for sure. All we know is that she was taken from the earth way too early. Mental Floss says, said to contain the spirit of a little girl called Lisa, these shoes were found by someone who was curating their late aunt's estate, tucked in a nursery closet alongside various Victorian clothes and toys. They suspected they were haunted, the seller writes, since there was a lot of knocking in the nursery closet. If actually possessed, tap dancing might wake one up in the middle of the night. The noise wasn't the only indication of the shoes' otherworldly nature. The house they were found in was rumored to be home to a number of ghosts, including that of a woman who had murdered her baby there in the 19th century, and the spirit of a 9-year-old girl who died of sepsis. So if you're the type of individual who likes to fall asleep to the sound of cursed shoes dancing all over the floor, then I guess this is for you. I don't know how many of those people are out there, but hey, no judgment here. I personally do not have any interest in purchasing some cursed shoes, but that's just me. Apparently, if your heart really does desire such a thing, then a few clicks on eBay is all it's gonna take. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Anguished Man painting. The Anguished Man painting has been something that we've talked a decent amount about on this channel when it comes to haunted and cursed paintings. Well, you can buy this haunted / cursed painting on eBay if you wanted to do so. The seller of this oil painting describes it as a horrific paranormal portrait. The artist is unknown, but according to its owner, the artwork may be responsible for a number of spooky goings on around the house. Since owning this painting, I've experienced a number of strange paranormal events that cannot be easily explained, the seller writes in the listing. These include hearing disembodied footsteps from elsewhere in the house, the sound of bird songs appearing out of thin air in the living room, and finally observing a heavy metal door latch lift by itself and the kitchen door open by itself. So that's a hard pass from me, guys. Not only will this painting curse you and your home, but also, like, really isn't that great of a painting to begin with. I mean, I don't want to disrespect the artist here. I'm sure that they had a great vision, but I don't really want to have a picture of a screaming dude in my home just looking at me all the time. Even if this thing wasn't haunted and was just totally normal, that would still scare the bejesus out of me late at night when I'm half asleep going to get a glass of water or something. If you are about it though, then hit them up on eBay and you can get the Anguished Man painting in your home today. Number 5 on this list is the Bassano vase. The Bassano vase is one of those old family heirlooms that you really don't want to get passed down to you. It started out as a wedding gift, also something that you really don't want to receive on your wedding day. Anyways, it's a pretty vase, so the couple accepted this vase and then tragedy struck. On the night of the wedding, after the ceremony, the bride was found dead in her room. It's said that she had her hands wrapped around this vase as she was dying, and in her final breaths before passing, vowed to have her revenge. This little vow at the end muddles things because we're not sure whether it was the vow that cursed the vase or if the vase was already cursed, but whatever. Adding it to the story makes it a little bit more interesting, so she cursed the vase. Either way, at this point, nobody realized that the vase had anything to do with the death of the young bride, which is really too bad. The vase turned into a family heirloom and was passed from generation to generation. As you can imagine, it didn't go so great for those who received this. More people kept dying, all of them extremely mysteriously. Eventually, somebody caught on and decided that this vase needed to get locked up for good. For a time, it was locked up in a secret location and nobody knew where this vase was. It should have stayed that way though. The vase in 1988 saw the light of day again and was sold off to a wealthy bidder who basically just bought an extremely expensive way to die. He died very soon after receiving this vase, and thus it began all over again. The vase exchanged hands some more, killing off more and more people as it went. Finally, somebody with some proactive thinking gave it to the police. Now, nobody knows where it ended up. Whether the police destroyed it, hid it, or held onto it is anyone's guess. Number 4 on this list is the chained oak. This one is really interesting, and even though history hasn't necessarily hidden it from us, it's definitely tried to negate the consequences. Atlas Obscura says, the chained oak is an old tree wrapped in chains to prevent its branches from falling. This is due to an alleged curse put on the tree when, in 1821, the 15th Earl of Shrewsbury refused a woman's pleas for money. It's said that she then put a curse upon the nearby oak. For every branch that falls from the tree, a member of the Earl's family would die. Later that night, one of the Earl's relatives died suddenly under mysterious circumstances. Convinced that the curse was true, the Earl ordered that the branches of the oak should be chained up to prevent more from falling. I feel for that Earl's family, man. Like, literally, I'm just a grandkid of this dude, and now if this tree breaks a little bit, I'm gonna die? No thank you. At least the Earl had the sense to chain up the tree and make sure that it won't happen to harm his family. But one big storm rolls through that place and wham, now some random person is just dying. Just pray that you don't happen to be the descendant of this guy, and if you are, cross your fingers those chains were done up tight. Number 3 on this list is the baker's wedding dress. Marriage is supposed to be one of the happiest times of your life. Finding that partner you intend to spend the rest of your life with, and then actually doing just that. Therefore, one of the happiest days of your life should be the day that all of this becomes official. Your wedding day. That's why it's particularly sad when tragedy or drama occurs on the day of said wedding. Just that is exactly what happened with Anna Baker. Scoop Whoop says, inside the Baker Mansion in Altoona, USA is the wedding dress of Anna Baker, who fell in love with an ironworker. Legends claim that Anna eloped from her home to get married to her lover, but her father forcibly brought her back and locked her in her bedroom. She then refused to marry anyone else and spent the rest of her life alone. After her death, the members of the Baker family reported spotting Anna's wedding dress at different places around the house. Some of them even saw the spirit of Anna Baker moving around the house dressed in that same wedding dress. Imagine literally getting forced back home and locked in your room by your father as you're getting married. It's no wonder that Anna was pissed and why this specific object has become very cursed. Now it's locked up in a case and hidden from the world in the Baker Mansion. It's a good thing that it is, because what Scoop Whoop didn't talk about is the fact that this dress can actually be dangerous. As ridiculous as it actually sounds, it has reportedly tried to strangle people in their sleep before. I know that the image of a floating wedding dress trying to suffocate somebody is kinda humorous, but I promise you that you wouldn't be laughing if it happened to you. I like that this thing is locked up, but would be far more comfortable if we just threw it in the fire and we're done with it completely. Number 2 on this list is the Anguished Man painting. The Anguished Man painting is pretty much exactly what it sounds like, a painting of a man in some very clear anguish. The thing is that this man doesn't really look all that human. He hardly has any facial features at all and almost looks a bit like a burn victim. Also, where his eyeballs should be, there's just these 2 gaping holes, and his mouth also looks like one giant hole with no end. Even without the haunting associated with this picture, it's already pretty scary, and I personally have no idea why anyone would want it in their home. That's exactly what Sean Robinson did though, and he quickly suffered the consequences. Scoop Whoop says, fascinated by the charm of the Anguished Man painting, Sean Robinson inherited the painting from his grandmother and decided to hang the painting on the wall of his house. Soon after that, Sean and his family started experiencing paranormal events like cracking of the doors in the middle of the night and sudden blood-curdling screams from nowhere. Sean's wife decided to investigate the origin of the painting and found that the artist who painted the painting killed himself, and before doing that, he mixed his own blood with the paint that he used in making the painting. Learning this, the couple decided to hide the painting in the basement of their house in Cumbria. So, the first thing about this story that is kind of questionable is how anybody could be fascinated by the charm of this thing. It's gross, and I don't like looking at it, let alone having it hanging in my home. The second thing that's super questionable is why we decided to hide it. I swear, none of these people have ever heard of fire before, guys. Like, great, thank you for hiding it from the world, this is helpful, but what would be even more helpful is if we just took a match and burned it so nobody ever has to deal with it again. I apologize to the artist who painted this thing, but if you're gonna use your own blood and make a haunted painting, then come on, man, kinda deserves to be burned. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Thomas Busby chair. This chair is freaking deadly, man, and even though it's pretty much safe from public use now, I still hate that it exists. Scoop Whoop says, popularly known as Busby's stoop chair, this wooden furniture is cursed by the spirit of Thomas Busby, who was known to ruthlessly murder people. Before getting hanged for his crimes, he requested to have a meal in his favorite local pub. Upon finishing his meal, he stood and said, "May sudden death come to anyone who dares sit on my chair." And ever since then, 63 people who dared to sit on the chair met untimely and terrifying deaths. Later, the owner of the pub donated the chair to the Thirsk Museum UK, and it's still there, hung 1.5 meters off the ground to prevent any further deaths. Can you imagine owning that pub and being like, "Oh, no worries, 60 people have died in this chair, all is good"? Like, how the heck did we allow 63 separate people to sit in this chair and die? And okay, like, I'm happy that it's hanging 1.5 meters off the ground and nobody can sit in it, but guys, come on. This is literally a dangerous weapon that we have right here. The fact that this thing hasn't been totally dismantled is kind of ridiculous. What happens if somebody steals this chair and then decides, you know what, I'm gonna murder people with it without anybody finding out? Frankly, I think history should have hidden this thing a little bit better. Hopefully we don't hear any more murderous stories about it from here on out. Number 5 on this list is Robert the Doll. Robert the Doll is one of the most haunted and cursed dolls on the entire planet. Ghosts and Gravestones says, the story of Robert the Doll dates back to the early 1900s when a young boy named Eugene Robert Otto was given a one-of-a-kind handmade doll by a servant that worked for his parents in his home. Eugene, who everybody called Gene, named the doll Robert and quickly became attached to his new friend. The home where Eugene lived, now called the Artist's House, is located at 534 Eaton Street and was built between 1890 and 1898. It was here that Eugene was given Robert the doll and where a friendship that lasted throughout his lifetime and beyond was forged. While he seemed like an ordinary cloth doll, it wasn't long before Robert was involved in strange and somewhat terrifying events. The first hint that something out of the ordinary was happening was one night when Gene, who was only 10 years old, awoke to find Robert the doll sitting at the end of his bed, staring at him. Moments later, his mother was awakened by his screams for help and the sounds of furniture being overturned in her son's bedroom. Gene cried for help, begging his mother to rescue him. When she was finally able to wrench the locked door open, she saw poor Gene curled up in fear on his bed, his room in shambles, and Robert the doll sitting at the foot of the bed. And all the child could say was Robert did it. Now, this was the first instance where Robert was acting up, but there have been tons of experiences since then where this doll is just doing things that really shouldn't be doing. He now lives in East Martello, where visitors